Hello everyone, and welcome to Chapter 1, Psychology, the Science of Behavior. So in this short video, we'll be looking at the first section, the nature of psychology. We'll be looking at psychology's scientific approach, the goals of psychology, principles, and then we'll be looking over some of the subfields of psychology. So psychology is the scientific study of behavior and the mind. So behavior are observable actions and responses, which are directly measurable. Whereas the mind, there we're measuring internal states and processes. Okay? So some of the ways that we can do that is having surveys, right? So have a survey and with a Likert scale. And what we're doing there is we're able to take someone's internal states or thoughts or feelings on something and give it a numeric value that we can enter into a spreadsheet, really. So everyone's heard of a Likert scale. So say number 1 is very, very much, 3 is a neutral, and 5 is not at all. We can measure, say, someone's self-esteem or level of happiness by asking them the question, how happy are you in the situation? And they can take their feeling and put it into a number, say a 3, neutral, or 1, very, very much. Okay. So we use different types of surveys all the time to measure these internal states, things that we cannot see. Diverse subfields of psychology. There are many, many. Okay, the text just covers some of them, some of the main ones, really. But there are many more. So when people find out that you're taking psychology, quite often they think the first thing you're taking is clinical psychology. When people, when I say that I have my PhD in psychology, the first thing they say is, oh, are you analyzing me? Or, oh, you can help me with my problems. And I said, no, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm actually an educational psychologist. The difference is clinical psychology, that's more to do with the study and the treatment of mental disorders. Okay, so people, you can go and obviously see a clinical psychologist. It's different years of school, different training, very, very different. Whereas educational psychology is mainly dealing with problems, processes, like products of education. So basically it's an attempt to apply like knowledge of psychology to the field of education. Basically, even the setup of a course at school, the way that the courses are organized, the way slides are organized, the way that we had at the beginning of this series of slides here, I outlined exactly where we were going in this video, because that has been shown to increase learning, having that organization. Also chunking vast amounts of information into smaller parcels has been shown to increase retention. So everything that has been done in this course actually is from my background in educational psychology in the design of this. Okay. So other fields, cognitive psychology, they study mental processes. They're more viewing the mind as an information processor. Okay. Experimental psychology, just jump down there for a minute. That's my background. Remember I told you also my master's degree, I worked with rats and pigeons and monkeys. So basically they're focusing on basic processes like learning, sensory systems, vision, perception, motivation, often involving laboratory experiments. So as I had said, that mine was dealing with rats, learning how rats can, like spatial localization, knowing where you are on space based on large beacons in the room, and triangulating where you are in that space. So anyways, yes, I got to play with rats and give them chocolate chips as rewards. So that was, I love doing it. I really did, working with the rats and the monkeys and the pigeons as well. But then I fell in love with education and decided to switch over. Another area, developmental psychology, examines human physical, psychological, and social development across a lifespan. That's where you're going to hear things like Erikson's stages of development. It's about how humans, the ways that they think and the ways that they learn and perceive things change over time. So a child is not a mini adult. A child thinks very, very differently. They're just at a completely different stage than as an adult. So it's looking at their perspectives and mental processes across time. Industrial organizational psychology examines people's behavior in the workplace, studying things like leadership, teamwork, factors that influence employees' job satisfaction. If you were working in a large company, they would have industrial organizational psychologists to help with many different areas. Work motivation, job satisfaction is a huge thing. The longer you can retain your employees, losing employees is very expensive. So they spend a lot of money on that. Personality psychology, obviously, identifying core personality traits. Places you would see that, say when you are applying for a job and they have you complete a personality test, which is always a little intimidating. I think they're asking you questions, and you're always looking for which answer is the right answer. Other areas, social psychology, examining people's thoughts, feelings, behaviors pertaining to their social world. The text then goes in a little bit about how these areas overlap. Many of them overlap. Okay, you're very rarely just doing one small area. Experimental psychology, a little bit more confined because, like I said, you're in a laboratory. But educational psychology, that overlaps with cognitive psychology, very much with developmental psychology, because you're examining learning in different age groups, right? Industrial organization is going to overlap with personality psychology and social psychology. So they all interact with each other. If you decide to pursue a career in psychology, it's not that you have to choose one, it's just that you tend to align more with one or two things that you click more with, things that you're very interested in pursuing. Here we have, they're calling it like a scientific hub. Okay, so you can see here all the different fields that psychology overlaps with outside of the area. So, for example, in engineering, they're going to be building and designing machines and structures, but a lot of that's going to have to do, be based on psychological principles, right? I mean, how things work well for people. Computer science, scientific study of information processing, that as well. Medicine, psychology, and psychiatry, very, very closely linked together. One of the skills you're going to learn in this course is how to think critically about behavior. So let's take a look at the test that they had here in Chapter 1. For each of these questions or statements, sort of put a tick beside it whether true or false. Okay? So number 1, most people with exceptionally high IQs are well adjusted in other areas of their lives. True or false? In romantic relationships, opposites usually attract. Overall, married adults are less happy than adults who aren't married. Graphology is a valid measure for measuring people's personality. A person who is innocent of a crime has nothing to fear from a lie detector test. People who die by suicide usually have signaled to others their intention to kill themselves. When you negatively reinforce someone's behavior, the person becomes more likely to behave that way. On some types of mental tasks, people perform as well or better when they are 70 years old than when they are 20 years old. Usually, it is safe to awaken someone who is sleepwalking. schizophrenic is a person who has two or more distinct personalities, hence the term split personality. By the way, we don't say a schizophrenic anymore. It's a person with schizophrenia. Okay, so have you a true false beside all of them? So the statements in orange have been demonstrated through research to be correct. How many did you get? The rest of them are sort of beliefs, things that we hear, opposites attract, there's songs about that, people who are married, maybe the single people, I don't know, assume that they're less happy. But there's a lot of assumptions and false information out there. So critical thinking involves taking an active role in understanding the world around you rather than merely receiving the information. It's about evaluating the validity of something presented to you as fact. I think we see a lot of that in social media, things that are presented as fact. I have things come into my feed quite a bit from people I know, and they present things as fact. And my first thought is, who wrote this? Where did they get this information from? There's rarely a source. So you really have to take a look at where the information is coming from, and whether that's a credible source or not. So when someone makes a claim or asserts something as fact, the questions you want to ask. So what exactly is the claim or assertion? Who is making the claim? Do they have any expertise at all? Is the source credible and trustworthy? What's the evidence for the claim, and how good is it? Are there other explanations possible? Quite often there are. And can I evaluate them? What's the most appropriate conclusion? So the faulty thinking pitfalls. Okay, in psychology, research has demonstrated that these three to be main pitfalls that people fall into, and it helps them maintain beliefs whether or not they're true. So one, mental shortcuts, judging based on stereotypes or preconceived notions of things. We do that sort of automatically sometimes. Failure to consider alternate explanations. So they assume the most obvious factor must be the one that caused it, right? And then once people have their beliefs established, we often fail to test them further. So we tend to pay attention to information that confirms it, and that's just evidence that it's true, as opposed to considering evidence further that shows that maybe it's not true. So what are the 4 central goals of psychology? The goals of psychology are to describe how people and other animals behave. We can describe and understand the causes of these behaviors. And if we can understand the causes of the behaviors, then we can begin to predict how certain people or animals will behave under certain conditions. And if we can predict that, then we may have the ability to influence that or control that behavior through knowledge and control of its causes to